Hello, welcome to the Housing Sector Podcast. Those of you who missed an episode last week, it was too hot and I welched and said, can we postpone this, which we've done till today, Sunday morning. And it has just cooled and it seems like it's broken, this heat wave. Suz, how are you?
Very good, thank you. We've had a busy week, as always. So, I know we're going to talk about that later as well.
We sure are. And the top of my list is rent strikes. Now, this is people saying, I've had enough. I'm going to stop paying it. And of course, there's going to be a massive knock-on effect. Suz, to start at the beginning, what do we think is going to be the main catalyst for these rent strikes?
Well, I mean, I think the question is, could we see big rent strikes in Britain? And there certainly have been big rent strikes in the past. And there are certainly reasons why people would take a rent strike. And by a rent strike, obviously what we're talking about is not any one individual or even a very small group of people kind of just not paying their rent, because they would be then very easy to evict for the landlord. The landlord would just be able to start proceedings against them. For non-payment. Really, a rent strike is when the numbers are so large. So if you go on strike and you withhold payment and refuse to pay your rent on your own, that's your problem. You're going to have a problem. If a load of people do it, then the landlord's going to have a problem rather than the people who are withholding the payment, if you see what I mean. So that's kind of what we mean by rent strikes. We're obviously not encouraging any individual to stop paying their rent now, because there would be consequences which would be really bad for them. But we have seen these kind of rent strike waves in the past in Britain, and I think there's some really useful lessons that we can learn from those and ask ourselves the question, could we see something similar in Britain? Obviously, they've always coincided with very high rents. I mean, it's always been against rent rises that they've happened. But I guess you also wonder, well, why haven't they happened recently? Because we have seen these massive rent rises, haven't we? And, you know, thinking about service charges, obviously service charges would be part of the package, if you like. So it could be that their rent has been stable, but they've paid massive increase in service charges. So it's really thinking around that. And could we see this happening en masse in Britain at any point, really?
And let's just cover service charges before we come back to the sort of fallout or implications of a rent strike. So service charge is often included within the rent. And as you and I have discussed in the past, and I'm sure it was on a podcast, and I'll try and find it, put it out there, in that there was almost a playbook when rent was frozen, there were rent caps, then there was the sort of playbook on how to push these costs onto the service charge and get away with that. And I personally have seen service going up, and we never get the service anyway. That was my main bet. You know, when it was affordable, or we're not getting the services, so there should be. But now they're just going up and up, and I see it as a sort of gulf of money that we just keep throwing money into. So service strike and a rent strike, that would all become one. So you might have some people are going, you know, I personally don't have a problem with paying my rent, and you know, because we're in a shared ownership, so we've got rent and we own a part and we've got a mortgage. But it's a service charge. Would these all come in together under one banner of, you know, enough greedy landlords?
I would be very surprised if it happened in Britain and service charges weren't included. And as you say, because there are some renters who pay a separate service charge element. Of course, renters are, of course, as part of their rent, part of what they're paying for, in theory at least, is not just pure surplus or profit for the landlord. It is to cover the cost of communal services, compliance, you know, getting the electricity checked and the gas checked and all of that done. That is part of what you pay your rent for. But for some tenants, there are add-on charges that they have no choice but to pay. And the landlords seem to be able to charge whatever they want for it. We know that it's very hard to get those under control, and we've seen those spiking. So as you say, what we might see is people whose rent is at a comfortable level, but their service charges, they're paying a separate service charge, and that's gone through the roof, and that's really pushing them to, you know, beyond the brink of being able to pay for it. So I would see that these would all be kind of in one bundle. And really what you're looking at, or what any organisation that was trying to organise it, or group of tenants and residents who were organising it, is really trying to get a good number of people to do it, because that is your protection against
safety
retaliation.
Safety in numbers. And let's for a minute, I'm going to play devil's advocate. let's say I'm a housing association, I'm a not-for-profit, and we all know that, lots of people making profit from my output, my organisation, my association. And this comes back to everything that we've done so far with, the freedom of information requests to the councils who don't
Yeah.
check the maths are correct, the errors that I found with my own landlord, the MPs who have said there's nothing I can really do about it, the councillors who won't get involved. Are we looking at protecting an organisation that if it fails, it's a domino effect and they're all going to fail and they're all going to need bailouts and the government can't deal with it? And when one housing association fails, we're going to have lots of stock that just disappears into who knows where. What happens if we all go on strike, Suze, and one housing association falls?
Yeah, well, I think what we need to bear in mind is that housing associations collectively, so this is across the sector, have got a surplus of over £4 billion. And that is a surplus. So that is the equivalent to profit in a private company. And so it means they've paid out everything they have to pay out, the staff salaries, their electricity bills, their gas bills, all of the other things that they have to pay out on. All of that's been paid for. What they've got left over, the difference between their income and their expenditure, that is their operating surplus. That is their surplus. And they're sitting on a surplus. So this isn't the turnover. The surplus is over £4 billion. So I don't think that you would have to have really, really mass rent and service charge strikes to get to a point where it was threatening the financial viability of the sector as a whole. Now, of course, there are some very small housing associations who are on much tighter margins. They haven't got these big pots of money sitting there. That's the Clarions, L&Q, A2 Dominion, GSA. It's the really big landlords that have got really big profits, really big surpluses. For the smaller ones, they aren't the ones where we get the complaints about service
No.
charges because
And they're providing the service.
and they're providing the service. So they are actually providing what the tenants and residents are paying for. And that's what people, when it comes to service charges, that's obviously what a lot of what they object to. But it shows as well that this principle of a housing association, so, the way that Peabody started off, and you could name a number of others that were in the same boat. The idea wasn't to amass these really big pots of money and have it sitting in the bank. And using it for very high chief executive salaries and bonuses and things like that. The idea was that that money would be ploughed into making the housing much, much cheaper, basically subsidising to keep the rents as low as possible so that ordinary people were able to afford them. And that's the principle that's flown out the window, hasn't it? It's completely flown out the window. Now it's all about maximising your income. And as you say, we know that housing associations have kind of looked at how do we, what is it that we were missing when there was a rent directive, like you say, in 2016 to reduce rents by 1% per year. They started looking about how do we claw that back from other sources. And that's really when they latched onto service charges as this basically a license to print money because they weren't able to use increases in rents. So they just went another route and did the same thing, but then got really greedy.
Yeah, and that seems to be the thing. It's just greed and incompetence. I mean, they can't do the basic job, and then they charge more for it. Like a mechanic who keeps sellotaping your exhaust together and charging you more and more. Okay, so with $4 billion sat in the bank, and they're gaining interest on that, I would have thought.
Yeah, I would imagine they get very nice rates. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
The point is the money isn't being put to good use. Certainly the Charity Commission, they have a maximum that they allow charities to kind of, depending on the size of the charity, their income, they're not allowed, they have a kind of a formula that says if you've, for the money that you've got sitting in the bank versus your annual kind of normal operating costs and expenditure, those two can't get too distant from each other. You can't amass, if you're a charity, you can't amass these big pots of money. That's not what you're there to do. You're there, people have donated, organisations have donated, individuals have donated to put that money to good use. And I think a lot of people think that given the way that housing associations get a lot of benefits as if they
Mm.
were charities and get a lot of money from the public purse, that principle should apply as well to housing associations. They can't just amass these big pots of money. They should be putting it to use for the benefit either of their existing tenants or residents, or, bringing new tenants and residents in, genuinely kind of affordable rents and, service charges, again, charge only what you have to for the services that are being provided.
Because a lot of these not-for-profits, and the whole thing is, isn't it? All money has to be put back into the associations so it can fund. Let me play devil's advocate once more. Maybe this should be a title of a future podcast series. The devil's advocate. So we're playing all this money back in. It's sitting there in surplus. You think the people, your BlackRocks, your Lloyds Bank, the people who are funding it, do you think they have quite a safe bet there? Like, okay, well, if they fall into remission, if everyone cancels their rent, we don't care because actually we then own all these homes and then we
Yeah,
can knock them down and rebuild them.
yeah,
Do you
yeah.
think that's a factor?
Yeah, I think that's the issue if it's small scale. I think what worries them, there have been incidents of people withholding payment of service charges and, as a group, and withholding, in some cases, rents. But it's not been very widespread, and I think this kind of starts to cut to it when it's still on a small scale. It doesn't worry the landlords because as you say, they can ride it out. They've got the money in the bank. They can ride it out. They're not going to be economically threatened by it. And people aren't saying we don't want to pay any rents. They're saying, we just can't afford the way that rents are really spiking, and we don't want to see this big profit or surplus being generated on the back of our rents or service charges. So it's not that people are, will be saying or are saying, we want to withhold everything. Um, but maybe that would be their form of protest. So a rent strike is a form of protest, but it's not that people want to say we want to carry on like this forever. People accept that, in the setup that we've got, if they want a home, they're going to have to pay rent for it. And in some cases service charge as well. So it's about having that as your bargaining chip. Really, it's about create for the tenants and residents, is about creating something, leverage that they've got then to work with these organisations and to say, this is where we need to bring it down to, so it is affordable and it's still paying for what we need to pay for. And if we look at the big historic kind of rent strikes in the past, that's what they've won. They've won changes, they've won adjustments to the rents. Service charges weren't such a big factor in the past. It was really about the overall rent level. Everything was kind of included in the package. And they won on the back of those. They won big rent reductions, and the landlords didn't go bust. They didn't go bust because
Yeah.
they had been generating massive profits. So, and government didn't go bust. So it wasn't catastrophic in that sense. It just meant that people could actually afford the homes, and evictions were prevented.
So would it sort of be set up with the agreement? Okay, right, we've got, say, 1,000 of us that are going to go on a rent strike, and we're going to do it January 1st until the end of January. We'll do it for the entire month. We will not pay rent or service charge. And then we'll hold that back. And is it important for residents to keep hold of that money? Pay it. I know when you're going for first tier tribunal, they
Yeah,
do say don't just not put that money somewhere else. Put it into
yeah,
another bank account.
yeah,
So
yeah.
would that be the plan with the rent strike?
Yeah, I mean, if people were going to do it, so what it's if you were going to do it, you have to do it in an organised way for it to really have a clear idea. It would be a group of people with a very clear idea of what it was that they wanted, a very clear demand, and then use the way that we might see with employers when people were taking strike action and withdrawing their labour. They plan it in advance. They say to the landlord, if you don't do X, if you don't reduce it by whatever it is, or if you don't stop charging for this service that we aren't receiving anyway, then we are going to withhold payment. So you're giving them notice that you're going to do it. You're giving them an opportunity to address the concern that people have probably been banging their heads on a wall trying to get a address for 2 years. And it's only then if the landlord doesn't do it within that kind of time frame that they've given them to address the concern. And it could be about repairs, it could be about antisocial behaviour, it could be about rent levels. It could be, it's a protest action. So it could be in protest to any aspect that people aren't happy with. And it's only if that's not addressed, then you would then move on to actually take that action. It's very much a last resort. And to protect themselves in that situation, there's a type of account that you can do with it, which is an escrow account. You can use that as a kind of holding account for the money. So you can say, no, we've got the money to pay, but at the moment we're withholding it. And it's very similar, as I say, to kind of taking industrial action in a workplace. You're not saying I'm withholding my labour forever. You're saying I'm
Mm.
withholding my labour until these issues, these complaints are being addressed, because they're just not being addressed. But people will only ever do that when it's really serious, when they're really not getting anywhere. They don't do it at the drop of a hat. It's not something that people just do on impulse, on a whim, as it were.
We've received this last week an email about staircasing. So, and we get them every sort of 3 to 6 months, I suppose. Buy another part of your property, and they've now put on some offer. And forgive me, I couldn't even be bothered to remember what it was for. But it just seems like a desperate cash grab. And my own landlord, Green Square Accord, and I'm going to hopefully record a video after this one. It seems like they are coming to an end. It seems like they have, run out of excuses, run out of funding,
Mm.
and run out of, and they're now sort of getting rid of staff and whatnot. Do you think being offered the chance to staircase is a last chance ditch to get some more money on their books and offload some dilapidated stock?
I think it could well be. I think, to anyone looking at this question, what they need to look at, what they need to do is really do their homework about what, are they getting kind of value for money in this instance? What are the implications? And obviously, that's going to vary from individual to individuals, but it's really important, I think, that people do their homework, because, you can end up being sold a pup in that sense, can't you, completely?
Yeah, yeah,
Is it going to give you more control over your property? One of the big things with shared ownership is that you have 100% of the maintenance costs, but you
yeah.
only own a certain proportion of the property. And also, how is that funded? Are you having to get a mortgage? Could you afford increased mortgage repayments? Is your rent going to go down if you are of a smaller share of the property? All of those questions come into it, don't they? Like, really, for people not to overstretch themselves. It's always presented by the landlord as a very attractive idea, because, as you say, that's what the landlord wants you to do. They've got a reason. It's not out of the generosity of their heart that they're saying that to you. They'll have a financial benefit to them, which is what they're after getting, isn't it?
Yeah, and go and check out Sue Phillips' shared ownership
Yeah,
resources. There's lots of resources on there from her. But yeah, I mean, it came through, and I think me and some of the residents that I've sort of engaged with here, it was just why would we give them any more money? We
yeah,
don't trust them. They're not looking after the
yeah.
building. We're already saddled. We can't, if I sell the flat here, I should imagine they'd get their checkbook out if they could move me out. they'd want to help us all. Yes, we'll go. But yeah, why would we get further into bed with these
Yeah.
people that we simply don't trust? Okay, look, the other thing that has really rattled my cage, as it does year on year, are the ongoing housing events. And haven't they been lovely? Hasn't it been great to catch up with people? Oh, it's been lovely in Manchester, and oh, I'm by the sea, and here I am in Brighton. Lovely to catch up with old friends. That floods LinkedIn. And here we are funding them. They've
Yeah.
got 4 billion in the bank, but we end up funding these events indirectly for our service charge and our rent. We pay the travel expenses. We travel where they're going to be staying, their accommodation. We pay for them to eat. We pay for their ticket. We pay for their tables. What's your thoughts on it? Am I barking up the wrong tree here?
No, it's just disgustingly self-congratulatory, isn't it? And,
Yeah.
some of it is just staggering. You think, how can this landlord that's had so much bad press end up getting these awards? Like, who is deciding what basis? And when you look at who the panels are, they're all other housing associations, other landlords, from
Yeah.
other boards of kind of, other housing associations, or developers, or whoever they are. It's all very incestuous, isn't it? And self-congratulatory, and certainly it
Yeah.
wouldn't be the choices that are made are not the choices that the tenants and residents would be making.
And it's not
Y
just awards. They
Yeah,
just seem to be going for these where they listen to people talk. They don't just catch up with old colleagues
yeah,
because it's such that small pond.
yeah,
So yeah, they all travelled up to Manchester. And then you have the Chartered Institute of Housing who does road shows, National Housing Federation. They had Ruth Cook talking at a National Housing Federation event. Well, hang on a minute, she's an absolute failure. But when we look at what actually spurs on the sector, the Chartered Institute of Housing and National Housing Federation and these events is crisis management. They are here to fix things. I was down at Grenfell for the 9th anniversary.
mm,
Me and my wife did the silent march. And again, like when we were at the housing protest a couple of months back where we failed to bump into each other, um, there weren't any semblance of the housing associations weren't there. There was no one that they want to hear the voice of the customer, and yet they never go to these type of
yeah,
events and get that sort of grassroots interaction. That because it would be them being shouted at
yeah,
for hours on end.
yeah,
But they'll go to a housing event where it's a safe audience, where it's people there who want to get their PO signed or who might need to apply for a job, 3 months down the line, and they play nice and talk about how great they're doing, and then they have award ceremonies.
yeah, yeah, and it's all very controlled, isn't it? They're in a little
Yeah,
bubble. They're in a little bubble,
yeah,
whereas, as you say, if they just come along to an event where there are tenants and residents there, they won't do it unless they can control it. I mean, that's the whole thing about tenant voice, isn't it? Versus genuine tenant empowerment. In the kind of tenant voice forums that they set up, they are controlling everything. They are controlling who is there. They're selecting them. They're controlling what questions they ask because they know that they've got an answer off pat for those questions. They don't want anything awkward being discussed. It's all in a very controlled environment. It's not the way you want to do it. It's the way we want to do it so that we can really control what is happening here. And we make sure that there's nothing embarrassing, or challenging for us. And they know, and that anger, they make out like, oh, that anger is such a threat to us. Of course we have to.
yeah.
Yeah, but that anger is there for a reason. It didn't just develop spontaneously. It developed because people have had years of trying to get you to listen to them, and not just listen, sit there with your ears open, but to actually do something about the things that they're asking you to address, the problems that they're asking you to address. The misery of antisocial behavior that drags on for years, devastates people's lives, affects their mental health. And, the landlord just doesn't want to get involved. They kind of put their hands up. Or, landlords who are charging for services who aren't being delivered, or are charging lots of money but not repairing the home so that the home, your home is crumbling around you. All of these things, that's what creates the anger, and that's what they don't want to see. That's what they don't want to hear from people. And then they tell you, well, we don't understand why people are so reluctant to turn up to our tenant engagement
Yeah.
events.
Yeah, and then you've got that stop social housing stigma, which they're all jumping on because there's no tangible result. It's easy to say we're doing this, we're
Yeah,
stopping stigma with Nick Bliss, whatever his name is, and got picked up by Housing 21. They run a story. Yeah, stigma's bad. We're going to fix stigma. I'd want you to fix the damp and mold.
yeah,
I want you to make the home safe.
yeah,
The stigma will come when we get the right
yeah,
people in play,
yeah,
and we don't have them in play.
yeah,
Your internal problems with your culture aren't up for us to solve. And you've got the National Housing Federation. Yeah, charging. Yeah, we're going to drive this one because that's something that they can then
yeah,
manipulate an outcome.
yeah.
And whilst doing it, they'll give you a badge. They'll make some funding off it. Here's a badge on our website that we pay £250 a month for. Brilliant.
Yeah, yeah. It's about the language. It's not about the
Yeah.
fundamental problems. And
No.
and as you say, those the things when we're talking to our members at SHAC, and I'm sure when you're talking to your neighbours, it's the fundamental issues. It's about the crack in the wall that is just getting bigger. It's about the water coming through the ceiling, because there's a leak in a pipe somewhere. It's about those issues. Like I say, the the sort of devastating antisocial behaviour on the estate. Those are the things that people are really concerned about.
Yeah, so they've got their gangs together, and we need to get ours, which brings us on to a union. Now, earlier on, we're talking about, a rent strike and whatnot, and service charge withholding, and that we need to be together, strong on this. We need to work together.
Mm.
And I've seen in the back you've got your
Got
new
our banner,
national union banner. Yeah, I like that. It's nice. It's going to
which
be good when you're talking.
yeah, it's going to come with us to the TUC to Congress. So we've got to the point where we have now finally published a version of the blueprint for a national housing union. So, I mean, this is really about as somebody when I was talking to one of the other campaign groups, a renters union, they used the word massify. We need to massify. There's lots of small housing campaign groups that are kind of focused maybe on a particular area or focused on a particular issue, like with SHAC, we're national, but we're kind of tightly focused on a couple of campaigns and things like that. But there's nothing really that is this big kind of overarching organization with the kind of power and resources to be able to provide everything from individual, very tailored, very specific casework to the big strategic legal challenges and organizing on a big scale. So when we were talking earlier about rent strikes, to have a body that could organize that on a mass scale, that is something. And maybe other kind of direct action as well, service charge strikes, other stuff, that kind of thing. And even, but also be able to do it very small scale on a particular neighborhood and have the resources to do that as well. So spanning the full range, when initially developed a sort of 7-page vision paper. We had a conference about it last October. People thought it was a good idea, so they got involved in writing up chapters for this blueprint, and we've now ended up with a document. The full document is 80 pages long. I know, because I've read every single page. So we've been working quite intensively on it. There's a more condensed version, which is about half that length. But it's still a little bit. We've published it kind of publicly now, but we are still consulting on it and may make some further changes before we get the version which is going to the TUC. And then that kind of takes us to the next stage, which is we try to get trade unions involved and to allow a sort of core team to be put together, paid staff, to actually start developing this housing union. And this is our banner for going to the TUC, which is 13th to the 16th of September. We'll be at stall 16. And we've also got a fringe event, and we're very happy to say that at least one union's confirmed that they will come and speak at this. So the General Secretary of the PCS Union, Public and Commercial Services, Fran Heathcote, has very kindly said that she will come and speak. The PCS is doing a survey on housing of its members about how housing is impacting them and impacting them in the home, but also in the workplace, which is really interesting. It'll be really interesting to see the results of that. And so, she'll be coming to talk about that and why a housing union, would be something that would be really helpful to them as well, and what kind of crossover work could be done. So, but we're also hoping that other general secretaries will come along. We haven't got confirmation of the slot that we've got for our official fringe event, but we will advertise that as well.
And have you had any engagement from the likes of the National Housing Federation or any of the housing associations?
We haven't invited them. We haven't invited them to kind of engage with it. I mean, certainly a housing union would be making representations directly to landlords. So, if you had a group of Riverside tenants who said, we're having real problems with this estate, on this estate, the drainage for our building is getting blocked up, or we're suffering damp and mold, or whatever it is. If you had a group and they went to the housing union and they asked the housing union to intervene, it would then get in touch with the landlord and kind of address them. But this is not an organisation for landlords. It's not serving the landlords. It's really balancing the power so that the tenants and residents have got something that is powerful enough to really make the landlords, again, it's that leverage. It has got the leverage to actually make the landlords listen. So, and we know that they're getting nervous about it. Just after we've been at the TUC, we've been invited to come and talk about it with MHCLG, the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government. And we think that that's a bit of a barometer of a slight maybe
Yeah.
nervousness that, you know,
Yeah.
tenants and residents are getting organised. That's the thing that they fear most. You can do what you like almost as an individual or a small group of tenants and residents. But once they start to feel that that organisation is growing, that's when they really get afraid, you know, of this idea of contagion, that if one group takes a rent strike, another, it'll pass to another group will say, yes, we're going to do that as well. And you'll get a kind of widespread contagion, because people get to that point, don't they, where they just say, we're not taking this anymore. We saw that with the civil rights movement, for example, where it just
Yeah.
got to a critical point and people just decided we're not going to be downtrodden anymore. We're going to stand up for our rights. And you know, they must be fearing that something similar will happen in housing, because it's such a big issue and such a big injustice.
Yeah, and it's the thing. It is safety in numbers. The more of us that come together, they can. As I've been through it
Yeah,
myself, they will attack you in every way they can, and discredit you whilst you're on your own. But if you keep going and stand strong, but if you've got an army of people behind
yeah,
you, and especially legal
yeah,
expertise, the thing I learned going through the legal thing was I didn't have legal expertise,
yeah,
and what I learned going through it makes me a lot better person the other end to fight back. And I wouldn't have done a lot of the things I in court. I wouldn't have agreed to any of it.
yeah.
So yeah, having someone there who's got authority. And you never know, Kate Henderson, who likes to travel the length and breadth of the country talking to people about how great the National Housing Federation is, you might even get a visit from her if you go somewhere nice. Set up a stall somewhere nice in Manchester. She'll come and visit you.
We'll set up outside the next housing awards ceremony. So yeah.
Do you think they I'm there's lots going on with Green Square Court, and I say another video coming, but there's lots of staff now who and I do have to be careful. They're reaching out to me. You know, I've always had a few. I've always had a few in there. Oh, Ben, we know when you publish a video because everyone walks around in a strop. But I'm getting more and more of them reach out to me now. And that is because they know that it's coming to an end and so many people have been fired and they suspect they're all going to lose their jobs. And a lot of them are saying, you know, we don't want to put our names to these letters. You know, we don't agree with it. And we've played along and now we're being sold down the river.
Mm,
And of course, a lot of these frontline staff will live in social housing, in shared
yeah.
ownership. They'll be paying into housing associations. You know, how afraid do you think they must be of the sort of, you know, when I hear, I've just watched a YouTube video by another guy, Honey Beat. So I put it on the other site. And he's actually published a phone call, which is something I wouldn't do. I've posted extracts, but I wouldn't post a call. And this woman's just clueless and she's bouncing it around. Well, I don't get that letter. And he's going, well, it's addressed to you. It's about the issues that you've raised. I've sent it to you. Yeah, but it's probably gone to data protection. But it's not about data protection. It's about Section 22. And you just think it is incompetence at the greatest level.
Yeah.
And I think I had a question here when I
Yeah.
started rambling.
Well, we were talking
But
about
I
the
think,
staff and you know the problems that you know for the frontline staff, and I think you know this is a little bit controversial sometimes. Not everyone agrees with us on this, but we at SHAC certainly don't see the frontline staff as being the enemy, if you like. You know,
no,
it's the top of the corporate ladder. That's where the problem is. You know, some of it will be staff that just haven't been trained for the job that they're doing, aren't being given the information that they need to do it. But primarily, when we speak to staff, it's about that they haven't got the flexibility, they haven't got the autonomy to do anything. So, whereas
yeah,
before it used to be that if you phoned your neighbourhood manager and said, "Oh, you know, there's a leak, you know, coming through my ceiling," they could phone the appropriate kind of tradespeople up and get them down on site, the maintenance staff straight away. They could book that in for you. It was job done. You know, if it was urgent, they would be there within a very short space of time, and the work, however long it took, would be done to get it addressed. But now they can't do that. They're not allowed. They have to send it to another department. That other department has to work through the 100 that have come in this week until they get to the one that you referred through. Um, and the tradespeople, for example, the maintenance staff, are told you go and do this job and you've got 15 minutes. And it's like, well, it's an hour long job. No, you've got 15 minutes to do it. just botch what you can in that 15 minutes. And those are the kind of complaints that we hear from the frontline staff. And I'm not surprised some of them don't want to put their names on these letters. So that autonomy to actually resolve the issues, to get things done, to get shit done, as people would say, is just not there anymore, is it? So we can't
No.
really, I don't think there's any point in us attacking the frontline staff because they haven't been given the tools to do the job. It's about the corporate culture and the top of the corporate tree that is really determining how that organisation functions, who gets hired, what they get hired to do, and how well they're trained and what tools they're given.
Do you know, I had a call 3 or 4 years ago. Some guy who was responsible for scheduling repairs. He said, Ben, he said, I understand, because I put it on LinkedIn. If it's a problem now, why am I going to go through the customer service desk? I put it on LinkedIn. It gets thousands of views and posted around. As if by magic, it's resolved by the end of the day. And he said to me, he said, Ben, I appreciate what you're doing and I understand what you're doing, but you have to understand that I have a schedule in place that I've worked on. And when you tag Roof Cook, it then gets flagged and then I have to rearrange everything, which means upsetting other people. And I was just like, yeah, I am probably a hindrance there. But what can
But
you
it
do?
shouldn't
If
be
you found
like
an
that,
effective
should
way,
it? It
no,
should be either Ben or somebody else. If Ben and
yeah,
somebody else need repairs doing, both of those should be done.
yeah,
Like what
yeah.
kind of, logic is that for a landlord? I'll let this
It's just been
property.
reactive,
Yeah,
aren't they? We're back to that reactive
yeah,
problem. We react to things. Oh God, now it's damp and mold. Oh God, now it's fire safety.
yeah.
Oh God, now they're going on bloody strike. We're gonna have to reduce our rents. Oh no, now we've got a union. All right. There we go. Look, some good. There we go. We've rabbited on for nearly 40 minutes.
The time
Not
has
bad for a
flown,
call with
Ben.
an
The
update.
time has flown as it always does.
It has flown by. I'm now pushing on with, sorry, due to heat waves and illness, there's been a delay, but I'm now pushing on with the service charge issue. That's going to be becoming more prevalent on the GSA residents website. There'll be more updates on what's going on there. Housing sector, what have we got going on in the housing sector world? The website is falling behind. I need to get that all updated. Lots to do. Suz, you're busy with the union. Anything else going on at SHAC that we need to be aware of?
We should be getting an update on our own service charge strategic legal action, which is we're looking at kind of how we hold government accountable for not protecting tenants and residents from this systematic and systemic financial abuse. So
Yeah.
we were hoping to have had a meeting earlier in the week. Unfortunately, that had to be cancelled for a very good reason. The person had to cancel it. So we're hoping that will take place soon. It's like everything, life gets in the way of the things you want to do, doesn't it? So we should have
It
an update
does.
on that. So hopefully, yeah, we'll come back next time we speak. We'll be able to speak about what's happening there.
And just to put that into context, for the stroppy emails that I occasionally get from people who I haven't helped out, this isn't my job.
Yeah,
This isn't your job, is it?
no,
It is Sunday morning. I have a day a week to try and get everything done. And if your emails come through and I've responded and then I'm not chasing up on it, I don't have the resources.
yeah,
So
yeah.
I'm apologizing for that, but please understand, neither Suz or I take a wage and we have other jobs.
Sadly,
There we go.
we do.
Here end of the rant. At least the weather's cooler. Right, Suz, keep it. I'll catch up during the week. Lovely to chat with you as always. Thank you to everyone. Like, subscribe, follow, do what you can, and stay strong. We are in this together, and we outnumber them. God bless you all. Take care. Thank you very much indeed. Where's my stop button?